The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Carrie Simpson, and I am the co-founder of Scissor. We cut the bullshit out of IT. With me today is Ian Richardson, the CEO of Doberman Technologies. And Ian had a suggestion about what he wanted to cover today, so we're going to talk about collaboration and communication. When I asked him whether he wanted to discuss communication software or communication styles, he said yes. So we're going to talk about a little bit of all of that and how you can tie it all together to create a more collaborative environment. Ian, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Carrie, glad to be here. Good to see you.
Always nice to have you here. All right, so just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. On our agenda today, we are going to talk about first tools and then strategies. And at the end, we're going to tie it all together with some time for Q&A, which I will remember to leave this time. When we did strategic planning last week, we got a little exuberant and ran out of time for Q&A. So for those of you who are watching today, who were on the previous webinar and sent in questions after, thank you so much. I'm glad we were able to answer your questions, even though we ran out of time. So same rules apply today. On the right-hand side of your computer, you will see a panel where you can type in questions. I will read them off to Ian at the end of the webinar. So if you have a specific question that you'd like answered, please, by all means, put it into that chat box so that we can get it covered off. There we go. I was having a technical error. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is Microsoft Teams. And I have to tell you, when Microsoft Teams first became a thing, I wasn't a huge fan. I found it to be kind of disruptive to our day-to-day practices. I didn't see a lot of need for it. And of course, through the pandemic, the way that we use Teams changed, and it's become an essential part of our organization, including when we sent our team home during the pandemic. We removed everybody's access to email upon the advice of our managed service provider, who coincidentally was Ian. So we wanted to find out, what was the best way to make sure that our team didn't inadvertently bring something dangerous into our organization. And he said the only way to do that was take away email. So we did, and we didn't give it back afterwards. Turns out we didn't need it that much. So Ian's company specializes in supporting organizations that are using Office 365 and using Teams better. So Ian, I'm going to let you share from here.
Sure, thanks, Carrie. So one of the things we've done through these is that vendor neutral aspect, and I kind of forced us to break it just a little bit. There's a lot of collaboration tools out of there, but Microsoft Teams is one of those ones that's just such a sweetheart deal that you can't not talk about it. So Teams is a communication tool, and it's built into Office 365. And there are plenty of folks who are using other technologies like Google or something else, but if you happen to be using Office 365, chances are you have Teams for free. Almost every license includes it. And Teams really is used around a multitude of communication styles. So you can do that one-to-one communication. So Carrie and I could be chatting back and forth through instant message, whether it's on a laptop or an iPhone or an Android device. It even works on those little watches that everyone's such a huge fan of. You can also use it for one-to-many communication. So if Carrie needed to talk to her team, she can do a broadcast message. Hey, remember this Friday we close at noon for the company offsite planning session. So you can use it for that one-to-many broadcast. And this can be broadcast both from a person or from some sort of system that you might use in your organization. So if you have a CRM that looks at client prospecting, or if you have an alerting system, you can have that alerting system integrate into Microsoft Teams and automatically post information. So an example of that, we use a peer recognition system at Doberman. And whenever one peer recognizes another peer, so hey, Carrie, thanks for helping me out on that project, here's some bonus. that peer recognition automatically posts into Microsoft Teams so that not only does Carrie know that, hey, I recognized her for helping me out, the rest of the team gets to celebrate in that collaborative aspect as well, which can really help out with, there's some interesting ways you can use that to help out with company culture and that recognition aspect. And then you also have many-to-many communication, that group chat. So you can have 5 or 6 people in what's called a Teams channel, which is just, think of that like a room, like a chat room from back in the early 90s. And you can just be having stream of consciousness thoughts, so everyone can be talking at one time about a topic or a project or a customer account. The possibilities really for many-to-many communication truly are endless. There's a couple of aspects of Teams that I know Carrie utilized quite a bit and are really a powerful, exciting piece of it that I don't see people talking about a lot. One is file collaboration around projects. With every Teams channel, those little group chat areas, you can have a place where people can upload and modify and share files. So if you had a spreadsheet that multiple people were working on, or a graphic design, or any number of scope of work documents for a project, you can put those into the Teams channel and have them sitting there. And as people modify them, they can re-upload those new versions. So it's a central repository for those working documents. Another huge piece of it is the planner portion of Teams, and I'm a massive fan of this. The planner portion allows you to create buckets of tasks. So, hey, we've got a marketing bucket and a sales bucket and a deliverable bucket, or if you're creating a marketing plan, here's the digital tasks, here's the webinar tasks, here's the whatever tasks. Truly, whatever you might be running a project on, you can use these buckets and organize tasks. And those tasks are, hey, this is what it is, this is when it's due by, and this is who's accountable for it, this is who's going to take care of that task. And it allows you to calendar it right out from within Teams. You don't have to leave the application to build a fully qualified project plan. Then there's a charts view that shows you an overall health of the project, what's in progress, what's done, what's coming up, as well as a timeline view, so you can see what's happening right now in October, November, December, what's happening after the first of the year. So a very nice, cost-effective project planning tool for small business that's built right into your email licensing, right into things that you were buying anyways because you wanted to have email or you needed to use Word or PowerPoint. Teams came along for the ride with no extra cost. It's a really powerful tool that Microsoft's spending a lot of time developing. So great piece of technology for folks to utilize.
So my first thought about that always is, how much longer will it be free for?
Yeah, absolutely. Microsoft's done a pretty good job with those bundles. And again, I'm not going to try to advocate or bang the drum too hard. I'm an old hat Microsoft guy, so I've been involved with that company since I started in IT. But Microsoft's done a pretty good job at creating effective, cost-effective bundles in their Office 365 and now Microsoft 365 offerings, and Teams at the core of that. So I would imagine that as long as someone is buying one of those bundles instead of an email-only license, they're going to get Teams for free for the foreseeable future. There's been no indication otherwise.
That's good to know. So we touched on file sharing a little bit and how you might do that in a Microsoft environment. Obviously, Microsoft is not the only file sharing game in town, and there are lots of different options. Ian, can you share a little bit with us on how Teams can better support groups through file sharing and what different processes or tools they have available to them?
Sure. So file sharing, as long as there are people, there's going to be data. And as long as there's data, we're going to need to work on it together, right? The crux of any business is getting something, a Word document, a spreadsheet, a presentation, a database, or whatever, and getting multiple people to be able to use that thing at once, or at least be able to, for me to be able to modify it, and for Carrie, for you to be able to have access to it, and then for you to be able to modify it, and for me to be able to have access to it. That involves file sharing. So when we go into an organization and we're talking about collaboration, one of the focus areas we have is hey, how do you share data? How do you share stuff? And 9 times out of 10, not 100% of the time, but almost, people are saying, well, we have a lot of different ways. And that's the first red flag. Everyone's always super excited about that. We've got our server, and we have Dropbox, and we use email, and we use Teams, and we use SharePoint, and we use this thing, and we use that thing. We use all of these things, and it's so great. We have so many ways to communicate. And then I usually say, oh, so if I wanted to know what the project status of project 1 was, where's my source of truth? And then the frown comes out. And people say, well, geez, I don't know. It kind of depends. And it depends, while the favorite answer of lawyers is usually the bane of productivity. So creating that single source of truth that everyone in the organization knows that, hey, if I need to work on the financial statements, I go here, and that's where they live. If I need to work on that spreadsheet for project 1 for client A, it lives in this platform. Not here and here and here and here and here. It lives here. And the most up-to-date version is always here. And making it so that people don't have to try to look in 6 different places is key to efficiency. So at Doberman, at our help desk, a couple of years back, we had stuff in a file sharing program, and we had binders, and we had stuff in a wiki, a knowledge-based type of aspect, and things in our main line of business software. And there was about 6 different places you could check for information about a client. And what that caused is when a client called in and said, hey, you know, this thing is broke. We go, oh, I don't know what that thing is. I guess I better look. Well, let me check here, let me check here, let me check here, let me check here. And before you know it, there's a 45-minute delay just looking for information about the thing. Didn't even start to fix it yet. We were just trying to figure out, what is that? By consolidating that all into a single point of truth, someone calls in, hey, the thing's broke. Oh, yep, there's the information on it. Let me get to fixing it. A much quicker time to resolution, which created a better customer experience. And this can be true for anyone. Imagine if you went to see your doctor, and instead of them looking in one spot in their health record, they had to, well, let me go to the chart room, and let me go to the basement, and you know what, it might be across town in the storage unit. We just got to go find your stuff. So you just sit there, and we'll be back. It's going to go over like a lead balloon. So really getting everything into one space for both your customer experience, but even just internal aspects, is a massive piece of file sharing. Another big thing to think about is paid versus free items. A lot of the times we'll walk in and people say, oh yeah, well, everyone's just using their own Dropbox. It's great, it's free, it doesn't cost us any money. I'm a huge fan of not costing money. But then what happens when Bob walks out and all that stuff was in Bob's personal Dropbox, or Bob's personal email, or Bob's personal whatever? That person left, and that account left with them because it was their personal account. You don't have that ability to have ownership of the data. We also can't control what Bob might do with the data. There's no security. There's no auditing. There's no backup. The cloud is just someone else's computer, right? That's all the cloud is in a simple way. It's just all your stuff stored somewhere else. You still need to have that backup strategy around file sharing systems, whatever system you choose. And if we don't have it be owned by the company, controlled by the company, secured by the company, and backed up by the company, it's not really the company's stuff. One last big thing around file sharing that I always challenge people is, what regulations are you subject to? So over in the EU, the UK, there's that GDPR, which has been making a little bit of waves in the United States. There's the California privacy law. There's the New York privacy law. There's absolutely a wave of data security and privacy compliance starting to flow into America. And once that becomes more of a law of the land versus piecemeal all around, there's going to be a lot of compliance concerns around files and how they're shared and how they're accessible. And so it's better to get ahead of that curve now and start to put in controls and systems to make sure that you're compliant with potential privacy laws. If you look at the different regulations, either statewide or different countries' regulations, you'll usually see some common themes. If there's a common theme amongst all of them, chances are it'll become the law of the land sooner rather than later. Why not just build to that best practice now?
Now, I know that when we made the move to Dropbox from SharePoint, for example, we moved to Dropbox, and we're not endorsing one over any other file sharing system here. So whatever works best for your company is fine. But we made the move because the number of files that we had nested below the parent files created such large file names that our OneDrive, or whatever they called it at the time, was constantly corrupting. So we had to make a choice to go with a file sharing solution. We moved to this particular one, but now we're kind of leaning back towards that Teams offering that we just talked about previously, because I love the idea of being able to put all client documents in something where everybody's looking at the same thing all the time. We found that even with Dropbox, quite often we would open a document, someone else had that document open. I think they've done a lot to counter that over the course of the last couple of years, but we'd end up with 17 copies of the same contract while clients were looking at it and we were looking at it and lawyers were looking at it, and all of a sudden nobody knew which the original was. So there are some things to consider when you're setting up your file sharing solutions, and it wouldn't hurt to have a professional take a look at how you're doing that from the very beginning. I know that had we made a different choice and not tried to do it ourselves the first time to save money, we might have had a much better experience with any of the solutions that we tried to implement, right? We knew we needed file sharing, and we started out with that kind of everybody had their own Dropbox, and it was a big mess. And, somebody left and they were a graphic designer and they had most of our graphic designs with them in their version of Dropbox. And then we had to fight with them to get it back. And, that alone was a good enough reason to use a paid subscription. But when I think about the amount of time that it saves everyone on my team knowing exactly where to find things, I don't have to waste an hour looking for something anymore. And, my time is pretty valuable at this point. I can bill out doing something else for that hour. I don't need to go looking for things. So when you're thinking about the cost benefit analysis of, should I use this free thing or should I pay someone to set up my file sharing appropriately, if you could save 1 hour per person in your organization every month, that file sharing solution pays for itself within a week. Definitely something to consider.
It really does, right? And that thread of bringing in an outside eyes, a lot of the times when my team comes to me about any number of items, the solution is readily apparent, and that's because there's a level of disconnectedness from the day-to-day tasks. I'm not solving technical issues on a daily basis, so when someone comes to me and says, hey, we've got this hang-up, a lot of the times it's a pretty quick conversation of, well, hey, have we thought about this? Did we think about that? Those sorts of conversations flow easier when you're disconnected. I like to call it floating above the trees, right? It's easy to see the forest when you're above it. When you're inside the forest, all you see are the trees. You can't see the path out. So having that outside individual who isn't tied up in politics, isn't tied up in the organization, isn't fighting the fires of today, especially when you're thinking about a strategy, whether it's file sharing or collaboration or any other items, can really, really be helpful. So having those conversations with peers, other business owners, a technology professional can really make things run quite a bit smoother.
Yeah, I think about all the lessons that we had to learn the hard way, and I don't regret all of them, but there are some where I was like, oh, I don't know what we were thinking on that one. But opportunity cost is probably the rallying cry of our business for the last 3 years. Like, okay, we could save a little bit of money doing it this way, but how much of our time are we going to spend here? And would that time be better spent elsewhere? And, if I can pay someone less than I bill out my time at to solve this problem for me, does it make sense? And most of the time, it absolutely does.
Yes.
All right, we're going to talk about something near and dear to my heart now, which is phone systems. We're a telemarketing company. We make a lot of outbound calls. Tell me about our different options when it comes to phone systems for small business now.
Yeah, so phones are one of those things. It's been around for 100 years and is still a lifeline for business. So there's a lot of different ways that people can use phones. And as similar to file sharing, phones are one of those items where folks kind of think about it in a couple of different ways. It's surprising how many businesses you'll walk into and everyone says, oh yeah, everyone's got their own cell phone and we just use their cell phones and call it a day. Same concern. If you're having folks use their personal cell phone, who owns that relationship with the customer? If that sales rep walks out the door, is it you or is it the sales rep? If people are texting your engineers instead of following the process, how do you know when they reached out to someone about an issue? Someone calls up and they're upset because something's been broken for a day and, well, I texted the engineer. That engineer was on vacation for the past 3 days. They're not back for 2 weeks. Their phone went with them because it's their personal phone. Is it the customer's fault? Is it our fault? Is it everyone's fault? Is it no one's fault? So making sure that you use a corporate phone system is still a very good idea for a lot of different reasons. And there's a lot of different technologies. You can have one out in the cloud. You can have one on site. You can have one that functions in between. And it really depends on what your needs are, right? And so that's a technical conversation, which I'm a big fan of following that rule of no geek speak aloud in these webinars. We're not going to talk tech, but you really want to make sure that you look at all the different options, especially at scale. Paying $30, $40, $50 per phone per month is a very, very big bill for an organization that might have 150 phones versus at that sort of size, you might be running your own sort of data center or having your own infrastructure around that makes an on-site phone system still a really good opportunity and a really good option. Things that I don't hear people thinking about, compliance. I'm a medical practice. Carrie, you called in and you said, hey, I need to have an appointment about situation A. And then that hosted phone system takes that voicemail, attaches it to an email and emails it to me. And suddenly I just broke federal law because that electronic health, protected health information just went out over the internet in an email. If it wasn't encrypted, if it wasn't protected, suddenly I'm violating something every time my phone system does its job, which is to say, Ian, you've got an email, listen to me, please. So thinking about the compliance concerns and how your phone system might impact them is a really good idea. Reporting and recording are two things that are near and dear to my heart. Reporting, what gets measured gets managed. You can make those data-driven decisions. You can know that, hey, when we have every Wednesday from 10 a.m. till 1 p.m., that's the busiest time of our week with phones. Well, you can staff accordingly to that. You can listen to the types of phone calls. You can look at the other areas of your business saying, is there something we're doing that's creating phone volume? Is there something that we're doing on Tuesday night that's causing an issue? Why are we so busy here when we're not busy there? Allows you to make those data-driven decisions around staffing, response, and strategy that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. Call recording, if you have every single call, inbound and outbound recorded, you can look for trends. You can look for potential training improvement areas amongst your team. You can try to find ways that someone might have done something really, really exceptionally well, or maybe there might have been room for improvement, and try to raise the bar of your service delivery, whatever that service is, to go from good to great. You can also use those recordings to make sure that your understanding is accurate. It's surprising how many times someone will hear something and that wasn't what was said. And especially if we're not documenting down notes, if we're not taking notes around those phone calls right as they happen, and we say, hey, didn't Bob call in the other day and say this? Well, I don't know. Let's pull the recording and listen. We don't have to try to remember. We don't have to guess. We can pull the recording, listen to what Bob said, and say, oh, wow, but he wasn't talking about that at all. He was talking about this thing over here. We better jump on that. So there's zero reason in today's environment to not have those tools available to you. Most importantly, though, if anything else, just the concept of having employees use their personal cell phones for corporate business, that employee leaves, that data leaves with them. Those voicemails leave with them, the contacts leave with them, the relationship leaves with them. Really want to think about, is that a risk that you're willing to tolerate?
Well, let's talk about the nightmare scenario when an employee leaves and a client calls them on their personal cell phone and the employee proceeds to disparage the business, for example. Now, if people think that isn't going to happen, it's absolutely going to happen. Succession planning for your sales team, for example. If your sales reps are using their personal devices in any way to support your sales initiatives, do they own the contacts or do you own the contacts? And again, especially relevant if you are working with a sales rep who may go on to work for one of your competitors in 6 months. They now have your entire book of business on their cell phone. They also have inbound calls because they've been sending out their email, or pardon me, their phone number in every email they've sent on your behalf for the last 3 years. So if you don't want your whole book of business walking out the door, it's essential to start looking at how you're managing mobile devices in your business. And then one more thing I'd like to touch on is, we're not lawyers here, but before you begin recording phone calls that are coming in or going out, it is essential that you talk to a lawyer, right? Depending on where you call and where you receive calls from, you may have to announce that you are recording a call, whether you're dialing out or whether a call is coming in. So you'll have to think about whether or not you can record the call legally. And again, that is a conversation for a lawyer in your state.
Yes, no one wants to run afoul of federal wiretapping laws, which are absolutely no joke. One other thing to consider is that by paying that $50 or $100 a month for your sales rep cell phone, that sales rep does leave. Think about the ease of transference. You own the number, you own the phone. Carrie left the organization. I came in as a new sales rep. I get Carrie's old phone. The number didn't change. So when someone calls looking for her, actually, you know what? Carrie moved on. I'm new on your account. How can I help you? That is the simplest transition, especially for someone who might have a very large diversified book of business, where that rep might be accountable for 200, 500, 1,000 different accounts. That single number that doesn't change from person to person can be overstated when it comes to value to your customer.
Yeah, the user experience is essential in that area.
Absolutely.
All right, so moving away from tools and moving towards communication styles and strategies, we're going to talk about when it is most appropriate to use what type of communication platform.
So this is driven from internally at Doberman. This topic is near and dear because we dealt with this earlier this year through COVID. One of the things that we found when I was talking with my office administrator, Tori, is she said, you know, one of the reasons why my calendar gets so gummed up is I have way too many meetings. Too often I'm stuck in a room for 4 or 6 hours a day going from topic to topic to topic. And I said, you're absolutely correct. This is something we should solve for. And so one of the items we did is we really sat down and looked internally and said, how are we communicating? And what are we communicating about? So if you think about it, instant message versus email versus a meeting versus a phone call. Instant message is one of those things where real time, I need an immediate response. It's a quick answer. It's an open shut. It's a close-ended question. Yes or no. Hey, does this person have this entitlement? Should I do this? This is my action plan. Does it sound okay? Those sorts of quick, immediate response. Instant message is a great aspect for it. Even if I'm out in the field, my cell phone can go bing. I can look at it. I can type out a quick yes, no, or don't do that, do this, send it off and go on with my day. Instant message is that great rapid response methodology that connects your team. Email is kind of that next piece, right? So something where you might be talking to an external party. Maybe it's a detailed topic where there's multiple bullet points that need to be addressed or multiple communication items. Summarizing a voice communication or a previous meeting is a great use of email. Also, email is good for something that has or carries importance. Lastly, it's a really great item for things that might have compliance requirements. Email can be archived in an intentional way to check a box for compliance. Chances are that you might have emails going back and forth around legal actions, things like that. Meetings goes one step further. Maybe this is a very complex topic where there's the chance for people to get confused or lost. You might have a meeting when the topic is particularly sensitive and it's not ready to be put down in writing. This should be voice, face-to-face communication. Or it's a topic where there's no clear action plan. Maybe this is something that's been long-standing. We've been trying to handle it through email, trying to handle it through instant message or phone calls, and it's just spinning. It's just cycling. We'll get everyone in the room, sit down, and say, all right, let's solve this today. Let's put all our brain power on it in a dedicated fashion for an hour or 2 hours or whatever to get this solved. Face-to-face meetings are great for those. Phone versus face-to-face. I'd say that a phone call can work in almost any situation. It can work for real time. It can work for detailed or importance, and it can work for sensitive topics. But I always follow the rule that if someone could get hurt, angry, or confused, do it face-to-face when safe, right? And if it's none of these topics, it's always nice to have that final question at the end of your communication flowchart. Do I use an email versus an instant message versus a whatever? Do we really need to talk about this? If it's not a sensitive topic, if it's not external or detailed or important, if it doesn't need an immediate response or whatever, did you really need to bring it up? Do we have to forward that office meeting to 300 people? The choice is yours, but think about it if it belongs in corporate communication.
So with the many channels that are available to all of us now and the expectation that we might be monitoring them all the time, which is something I personally have worked very hard at for the last couple of years. Like my cell phone doesn't ring and I don't monitor email or Teams or anything outside of business hours. So I had to slowly and carefully start conditioning my clients and my team because I used to be 100% available to them all the time. An email came in at 2 in the morning, it woke me up and I replied to it. And I lived my life like that for a few years and then slowly but surely recognized that that wasn't a very healthy way to approach communicating. So talk to us a little bit about how you can create a better environment for inter-office or client to provider communication.
Yeah, so controlling the expectation around immediacy is a big piece of communication and collaboration strategy, and you hit the nail on the head, both internal and external. Right now in the current culture, people are used to that instant gratification. They want you to be available at the drop of a hat. They send an email, they're looking for an immediate response, and that email might have 20 different bullet points. I need to know everything right now, and why haven't you responded to me already? I sent you that email 10 minutes ago. And rarely is there a topic that we can't slow down and think. Everybody needs time to think. Rarely is the first instinct the correct one. I found, at least for me, it's good to have time to collaborate, especially on a complicated topic. Not everyone is an expert on everything. And if I had a issue around my business development representatives, Carrie, I'd probably want to have a call and say, hey, I've got this problem. Have you experienced this before? What might I do here, right? We don't need to respond immediately. Also, it sets a terrible expectation. People, even though it might not be explicitly stated, develop an expectation based off of previous experience. So if someone gets used to you responding every single time, that time that you don't, there's a letdown. Even though it wasn't stated that, hey, I'll respond within 5 minutes to emails, and I'm going to check my emails at 2 a.m. in the morning, and Monday through Sunday, 365 days a year, I'm available to you, even if your contract explicitly states you're not. If that's the way you perform, that's the expectation that someone will develop. And that is impossible to maintain at scale. As an organization, Doberman was absolutely guilty of this. Back in the early days, Every time someone emailed, there'd be that immediate response. Let me jump on it right away for you. 2 a.m., no problem. Weekend, no problem. Christmas Eve, Thanksgiving, Christmas Day, no problem. We got you covered. And that does not scale well. When you have 5 clients, it's easy to do that. When you have 100 clients, it's impossible to maintain that sort of scale. Everybody develops this, and so you'll see this in organizations just with our expectations of our team too. Technical companies are absolutely guilty of this. You'll have a project engineer who starts out and they're single, they have no kids, they don't have a girlfriend, happy to work nights, happy to work weekends, boss. And slowly but surely, people get family. They have a spouse, they might have children, they have pets, they have community engagement. And those things start to take precedence. And now it's not okay for me to work every night. It's not okay for me to work every weekend. I'd like to take back some of that work-life balance. And that is okay. It doesn't make them a worse employee. It doesn't make them less invaluable. But we need to be able to make sure that we reduce that expectation, especially around immediate communication, especially around post-hours communication, especially around, hey, getting right back to you. You can't maintain that at scale, nor should you. And so it's best to not set the expectation up front.
I know for me, it was a very difficult transition. And if you're used to engaging with your clients with that level of immediacy, and you want to get to the point where, hey, you know what, I'd like to leave the office at 5 o'clock and I'd like to pay attention to my kids, and I want my partner to stop yelling at me because I work through dinner every night, you're not going to be able to do it all at once, right? So what I had to do was just slowly but surely start using my mobile device less, right? And this was actually unintentional, and you may remember these days, but I accidentally set up some sort of restriction on my phone that I ended up not being able to take off. So my phone didn't ring after 8 p.m. or before 9 a.m. period. And I was never like, until I changed phones, I was stuck with that. I couldn't send a text. I couldn't receive a text, no emails, no nothing. And I just got used to it, which was really nice. And then from there, I went on to removing social media applications from my phone entirely. And now my phone doesn't ring. I keep the ringer off. I don't use the phone for your convenience. I use my mobile phone for my convenience. If I need to make a phone call, I have it. If I want to open an email, I have it. But I don't use my mobile so that you can contact me when you want to contact me. And that was a huge switch, and it took me about a year. So if you're thinking about how you can better support your team, for example, in some work-life balance, maybe beginning with something like that is a good way to begin, where you can say, hey, as of now, we no longer keep our email on our phones, for example. That's something that, again, with the pandemic, our team no longer had email. If you weren't a member of the leadership team, you didn't have email anymore. And we ended up locking all of our line of business applications down to our IP address so that our employees had genuine work-life balance. And that was, again, something suggested by our IT company, and it caught on pretty quickly, right? At 3:30, when you go home, you now have no access to anything that you were doing at work. It made people plan their days far more efficiently. So they were doing 8 hours of work in their 8-hour days instead of doing 4 hours of work in their 8-hour day and then going home and kind of chipping away at anything that they had left over. So we saw a huge uptick in productivity during business hours. And we saw a huge change in how our employees were managing their time as well. So people would come in after a weekend super relaxed and happy. They didn't have to interact with us if they didn't want to on the weekends. I mean, if you had a buddy at work, you could text them. You didn't need to communicate with them through Teams. So that was a really interesting change for our company. And I hope other people who are watching the webinar today think about how they can use these communication tools, not only to improve how they're communicating with each other, but how can you create a better experience for both your clients and your team members?
I think you touched on something that certainly resonates with me, and I hope it resonates with the attendees here, that concept of the work-life balance. Having a stressed out organization benefits no one. And if you're always on, if you're never unplugging, if you're never allowed to say, this is no longer my problem, I'm not going to accept that I have to answer every single thing every single time. You're never able to let your brain relax. You're never able to let go of that stress, and constant stress will physically kill you. That aspect of always having those stress emotions, those stress hormones going, shortens lifespans. And so immediacy it's never that critical, which I think we're about to hit on that next topic, right?
Are we?
But that communication skill set. So before we dive into this, I think one thing that I always like to emphasize with, I guess, that last bit of immediacy is that 5 minutes, right? Like rarely outside of a emergency room or first responders is there a situation where you can't wait 5 minutes to respond, right? Just making sure to take 5 minutes before responding to something can reduce miscommunication in a significant way. How does it read? How does this email read if you were receiving it? If someone was saying this to you about your organization, how does that make you feel? Does it serve your organization's mission? Is it in alignment with your values? Are you being reactive or are you being logical? So is this communication based out of emotion or out of fact? So just a couple of things. I'm a big fan of write the email out, click the trash can, write it a second time. Don't delete parts of it, just delete the whole thing and redo the email, especially about that sensitive topic. Goes a long way.
I think I read this somewhere recently. 80% of being an adult is just not hitting the send button.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Communication skill set, that's one of them, right? The pause. The pause is what we're really talking about here. Documentation, especially of verbal items. So if we're having a phone call, that phone call of any level of importance, I'm a big fan of the email summary. Hey, Carrie, thanks for the chat today. We talked about A, B, C, and D. A, B, and C, we're going to take care of for you. And we mentioned that we're going to have those to you next Friday, date by close of business. And D is something that you have to go talk with Tracy about and that you are going to send back to me. And you said that you were going to get that to me by the end of today. So clearly defining, hey, you know what? This is what we talked about. These are the next points of action. This is when they're going to be dealt with. This is who's going to deal with them. Make sure that you're setting that down, right? And by clearly documenting the verbal communication, you're making sure we didn't miss anything. It's surprising how often when I'm having a phone call with someone and I send that email, they say, hey, by the way, there was this other thing. Just forgot about it. Ever forget? Happened to me. So making sure that we write down everything and clearly communicate, that gives the opportunity for the other parties to chime in and say, well, actually, we talked about this. There was that one other thing. And that one other thing might be a minor detail, but it might be of key critical importance. And it's okay to forget. We're all human. So making sure to clearly articulate those important verbal communications in a written format just saves everyone from themselves. Make sure that everyone's in alignment, all the expectations are set up, and that we're not missing anything. And that expectation management is key to not allowing for assumptions, right? So clearly stating at all times in any sort of communication the who, what, when, where, why, how. Making sure that we're specific is key, because when someone doesn't have a clear expectation, they will fill in the blank with their own expectations. And that's how misalignments occur. Also, another big piece is to ask if there is an expectation that's being set. Hey, Carrie, I think I've heard that you're expecting A, B, and C from me. Is that right? Did I miss anything? Well, no, I actually wasn't expecting that. I just need this. Okay. Well, I just saved myself a whole truck ton of work by asking if you were expecting me to do that, right? And also, if you'd been expecting me to do one thing and I was going to do these three other things, not only would I have done three things I didn't need to do, but I wouldn't have done the one thing you actually care about. So just making sure to clearly ask. I would much rather be asked, hey, what do you need from me on this? Is there a deliverable that you're looking for versus anything else? Another big piece is when someone's calling and there are some complaints, one of the items that I will do is I'll listen to those complaints, but then say, hey, are we looking to problem solve? Or do you need me to just hear you? And that's a very powerful statement because sometimes people just need to be heard and they're not looking to solve a problem. I need you to hear that when this happened, it impacted me in this way. Like, how did I hear you? We're not looking to problem solve, then let's not do that. Making sure that we're not falling into assumption fallacies. And this is the hallmark of entrepreneurs, at least this entrepreneur. Everybody can read my mind. Everybody knows exactly what I'm looking from them all the time, and I don't have to say it because you just know that I was expecting you to do that. So go do it. Except I didn't vocalize it at all. And so I've set up everyone to fail. Did we really say what we thought? Did other people hear what we said? Did we hear what other people said? Is there an assumption in the room on what's happening, right? So this ties in with expectation management. A lot of times, entrepreneurs are guilty of, you know what, yep, this is what's going to happen and this is how it's going to happen. And the only person who knew about that was this one right here. So not clearly communicating what we need to get done, when we want it done, how we want it done, who's going to do it. We're assuming that everyone can read our mind. And unfortunately, working in a business does not grant mind reading powers. So just being clear and articulating and asking about the details, asking about the deliverables can really help make it so that there's less miscommunication. And 10 times out of 10 when there's an issue, doesn't mean that communication is the only problem, but I guarantee you it's going to be one of the problems that cause this to go sideways. One of the last is something that I gained from therapy, and that's mirroring and reflective listening, repeating back what someone's told you. A favorite favorite question that I ask, especially about a complicated topic, hey, can I restate this to make sure I heard you correctly? And I just, A, B, C, D. When you're repeating something back, especially in a high intensity situation, it has been shown that that lowers intensity in the room. When you're stating back what someone has said, someone will recognize subconsciously that you have heard them. You heard my complaints. You were able to restate them to me. I know that I've been heard. And that can just ratchet us down 10%. And that 10% starts to de-escalate feelings in the room. It also allows anyone in the room to restate their intentions or points. You might have said A and I heard B. You know what? That wasn't what I was trying to communicate. Let me restate it to you. Okay, I heard you say A and you said A. We're in alignment. Expectations have been set. There's no assumptions. There's no fallacy. We know what's going to happen. So just using that mirroring and reflective listening can be a very, very powerful aspect and a very, very effective communication tool. It's probably the single most effective communication tool I've started using in the past 18 months. It's quite literally changed my life. So that is one thing that I would love to pass along to the audience, and hopefully it can be as helpful to them as it has been helpful to me.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many people this applies to on the webinar today, or those of you who are watching at a later time, but I know that both Ian and I have family members that work in our business, and we have employees that have been with us from the beginning, so we have personal relationships with some of the people that work for us as well. And the biggest challenge I found in our business with multiple people who were friends or relatives was that every conversation ended up either going into a work-based conversation. Like I haven't had a family dinner in 7 years where we didn't end up talking about work, for example. And one of the things that we tried to mitigate that and to eliminate some expectations around, I had personal relationships with some of my employees. And I think that there was a lot of times where they felt uncomfortable not responding to me in a timely fashion, right? So if I sent them a text at 10 o'clock at night that was something social, maybe a meme or something that I thought was funny, there was an obligation on their part, or they felt like there was an obligation on their part to respond, even though I was communicating with them as a friend and not as their boss, trying to delineate and having them try to delineate whether this was boss Carrie or friend Carrie or, sister Carrie or boss Carrie was really challenging. So one of the things our company tried was we kept all business communication in one platform and personal communication in another platform. So you knew that if I was sending you a text at 10 o'clock at night, you didn't have to respond to that. I mean, you shouldn't have to respond to your boss at 10 o'clock at night anyway, but you shouldn't feel compelled to interact in any way with a text message that is something that we are doing as friends or as family members. Keeping your business communication, especially, I know I recognize some of the people who are on the webinar today, and I know that you are structured similarly. I know that you work with your brother or your parents, and I know we've talked about it. So that is my big takeaway for people today is if you have a lot of family members or friends on your team, start dividing where and how you communicate and how you communicate with which platform. And that way you miss a lot of, we had a lot of hurt feelings early on, right? Somebody would send a message and someone didn't reply to it. And well, I thought we were friends. What's happening here? How come you're not responding to my, and things are getting lost in the shuffle and personal stuff is all mixed up in business stuff. And it got really, really complicated. And, when people are involved, things could get really, really messy. So big takeaway for me on that was divide and conquer. Right? You can have a personal relationship with the people you work with. But when those things start to dovetail into each other, the communication gets super, super messy.
It really can. As long as people are involved, misunderstandings will occur, right?
Yeah, and there was a couple of good ones over the last few years. I could say that now because Tracy doesn't work here anymore. No, I just said that for Tracy. She's probably not even watching, so. And why not?
That's right.
So, where are we today? We have a little bit of time for Q&A, and there's a couple of questions that have come in, Ian. So if you don't mind, we're just to be respectful of people's time with only a handful of minutes left, I'm going to go right into them. So, and this is kind of a long question. It's about email archiving, and they're saying, is there another way that I can archive emails that isn't printing things off and filing them? So I don't know if they're printing to PDF or if they're moving, but what can people do if they want to do that?
A lot of different technology. There's a lot of different automated systems. They work with almost any emails. So whether you use Microsoft or Google or something else, there's a lot of different archiving and backup solutions. Archiving is that kind of putting it aside for compliance sake or legal sake, and email backup is more around getting your emails back in case something goes bump in the night. There are a lot of different technology solutions. I'd reach out to your technologist of choice and start that conversation.
Excellent. Well, I think that is all the time we have for Q&A today. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Ian, as always, it's a pleasure to have you, and I'll look forward to talking to you again on Thursday. What is our topic on Thursday?
That's a good question. I think we're talking about is managed IT right for my business, but I could be mistaken.
No, that absolutely is what we're talking about on Thursday. So for those of you watching today, if you want to join us again at 11 o'clock Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific on Thursday, we're going to be talking about managed IT and how to decide whether or not managed IT might be right for your company. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and I will look forward to chatting with you again on Thursday.
Thanks, Carrie. Take care.